I'm here to talk today about innovation, which is, aside from my family and my kids, my favorite topic. And so I want to share with you some ideas and work that I've been doing and my colleagues have been doing over the last really 10 years. We've been working specifically as innovation people over that time. And as Tracy mentioned, I've written some books, and I now teach and consult on innovation around the world. And when Tracy reached out to me and we started discussing that I would possibly spend some time with you guys, the issues that she asked me to focus on were around innovation culture, which is the people aspect of things. So that's really what I've organized my talk around. This is like a tiny little slice of a huge universe. So the whole universe of innovation, we could literally spend more than 2 weeks in here, and I do that with some of our clients. So just please remember, we have an hour and a half to talk about a topic which is considerable. So, as you can see, this image from Picasso's image of Don Quixote, innovation is very much a quest. And so it's a journey, and it's about discovery, and it's about doing things that we haven't done before. So we make things that used to be impossible reality. So one of the things that Tracy did to help me prepare for this is she shared with me a paper that one of your teams wrote in October of 2006 about innovation called The Path to Innovation. And I really like that title. We also wrote a white paper called The Path to Innovation at about the same time frame. So I read through it. I read through it a couple times, and there's a lot of things in here that I really like, a few things that I would somewhat disagree with. But as a way to sort of tee up our conversation today, what I'd like you to do is to have a short conversation with the person next to you, so in pairs, and hopefully for those of you who are remotely, if there's two of you there, you can chat, and if not, just please brainstorm by yourself for a minute, and think about how should innovation serve this organization? What is the biggest challenge facing MPCA that innovation can help you address? Is that clear? Is my question clear? Yeah. Okay, so just chat for a couple minutes, and then we'll just take a couple of random ideas from people.
Did you know that one of the ways
Could anybody throw out a couple of issues or challenges that this organization is dealing with that innovation can help you with, just for my purposes as well as for the rest of you?
Yes. One of the problems I'll have to address is a continuing, it's most likely that the appropriations for the Park Service will continue to go down.
Right.
And so we'll have to address that in an innovative fashion.
So we hear that from every government organization that we work with everywhere in the world, that the amount of money they have to work with is always either under threat or literally in decline. But the requirements for them to produce output is usually increasing. So they almost always have to produce more with less, which is actually a classic definition of innovation. So, excellent example. Thank you. Yes, sir.
We talked about as a culture, our organization is sometimes afraid of risk.
Oh,
take risk.
The big R word. Yeah, we'll talk about that shortly. That dealing with risk and all the consequences and issues around that is critical. And a lot of my presentation will deal with that question. So, anything else?
We're going to encourage managers, both mid-level to upper-level management, to let staff try new things in innovative ways.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a corollary of risk, is the willingness to experiment and to try new things, both without fear of organizational negative consequences, but also the one standing in the organization can be protected in a sense. So we'll talk about that as well. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
As a nonprofit, we're dependent upon our fundraising ability, and probably one of our biggest challenges now is how we can do a better job of engaging donors, say from the $1,000 level, to convert them to become donors at the $5,000 or $10,000 level. It's a matter of not just asking them for a bigger gift, but it's how do we make our message resonate with them so that there are more compelling reasons, and there's more ways for them to be involved
Right.
with the organization, so that they feel an ownership of our mission.
Right, exactly. So innovation typically in organizations has a big role to play in how you communicate, what you communicate, whom you communicate with, and ultimately what relationship you build with the people who are part of your larger stakeholder constituency. So those are 4 very good examples. I definitely agree with all of them. So I'm going to carry on now and just share with you some of our ideas on these topics. So part of what the focus or the challenge is identifying what's impossible and what we actually want to go for. So in a sort of a technical way, innovation is a way to make things that were formerly impossible part of our reality. So there's an interesting transformation in reality that has to happen. Innovation is about curiosity, learning. It's about creating new value for businesses and for society. And interestingly enough, whether you're a for-profit organization, a government agency, or a not-for-profit, it's all the same. So you might see references in here to business, but the same issues pertain to all 3 types of organizations, regardless of your sort of orientation towards profit and service. So, clearly what I'm saying here is that we start with our curiosity. It leads us to learn new things. As we learn how to transform that learning into value, that's really what innovation is all about. So that was by way of definition. Now I want to explore some of the qualities and characteristics of innovation, and specifically, as I mentioned, the innovation culture, because that's what Tracy asked me to focus on. So we use this as a nice example from the for-profit sector, but one you're all familiar with. So innovation is often about being willing to be wrong, as Jim mentioned, the whole issue of risk. So risk is, I don't know the answer, but I'm interested in the question. How can I resolve that? So this is a quote from a guy at Apple who you may have heard of. His name is Jonathan Ive. He's now Sir Jonathan Ive. He recently was knighted by the Queen. And he's talking about the team which designed the iPod and the iPhone, and how they operate in their team and how they think in their team. And he talks about the enthusiasm for discovering new things. But his way of expressing it was great. He said, we get excited about being wrong. In most organizations, being wrong is a bad thing, and you might get punished for it, or you might get people kind of looking over their glasses at you, or some other form of negative feedback. But here it's like, wow, I did something wrong, and look what I learned from it. So, obviously that spirit is part of Apple, and that's part of how Apple has achieved some amazing things in the last 5 to 10 years. So, in a sense, it's about surprises, right? So being wrong is about being surprised. And actually, what is a surprise? A surprise is when we are confronted with our own assumptions and expectations. And so we all make assumptions constantly about the way the world is, about what's possible and what's not possible. And going back to the theme of impossible, innovation is about choosing to make things that used to be impossible real. Right? And that clearly requires us to confront assumptions. And so when you go looking for ways to relate to your stakeholders, or you go looking for ways to do more work with less money, you're going to have to confront those assumptions. And actually discovering what the assumptions are so that you can then confront them is a big part of the work, the practical work of innovation. So Tracy mentioned a book that I wrote. It's called The Innovation Master Plan, and it attempts to take something which is very amorphous and abstract and make it very specific by defining steps without losing sort of the spirit of discovery. And a lot of that is around what are our assumptions, and in what ways are our assumptions leading us incorrectly. So obviously innovation is largely driven by questions. And questions are tremendously powerful. So we use questions as a way of interacting with people at all levels of all organizations, because if you happen to ask the right question, it can transform the way someone else sees an issue or a problem. So we're always encouraging people to ask more questions. And this includes you. So, Carrie, can you pass those around? So we prepared some worksheets, and it's obviously more than we have time for today, but some of them I thought might be interesting for you guys to look at later on. But the first worksheet, so if you open the cover of this little packet on page 1, it says, please write down 5 really good questions. We're not going to take time for you to write down 5 at this moment, but I would invite you to write them down as we go along. The other thing that we've discovered is that the act of writing things down, whether it's on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard or on some medium, is tremendously important in the whole learning process around what innovation is. So I have now provided you with a specific way of writing things down. So the other thing that I find very interesting about the word question, which I didn't really realize until I started this way of thinking in my own world, is that the word quest is embedded in question, which I think linguistically is very interesting, because what it says is when you ask questions, you are on a quest. And again, our quest is about making things that were impossible into reality. So 2 of the questions which are very powerful are why and why not. And so on the screen is a picture of a Polaroid camera. Does anyone know the story of how the Polaroid camera happened to be invented? It's a very simple story, but it illustrates the power of the right question at the right time. So the inventor, Edwin Land, was a photographer. I mean, he liked to take pictures as a hobby. He was a chemist by profession. And he had a daughter who was about 7, and he liked to take pictures of his daughter. And one day, she got all dressed up in her best Sunday dress. This was in the early 1900s, so people got dressed up nicely for these kinds of Sunday occasions, right? So he poses her in front of the house, right? So he's out at the sidewalk, and he's got his camera on the tripod, and she's there very proudly, 7 years old, in front of the house. Right? So he takes the picture, and she runs over to him, and she says, Daddy, Daddy, show me the picture. And he says, well, dear, I have to develop the film first, and then we'll have to print it, and then you can look at it, and, so I'll go in the dark room and do that, and you'll be able to see the picture in a couple hours. And she goes, no, Daddy, I need to see it now. Why can't I see it now? And that question literally inspired him to invent the Polaroid camera. Why not? Why can I not see it now? And that led him, as a chemist, to thinking about, well, why not? And so then we have the Polaroid technology, which has then been replaced by digital technology, but it's actually coming back, if you've been following it. People are now using Polaroids again in the sort of the Facebook social media world. So anyway, obviously the point of it is that these questions, the right questions, help you, enable you to see things as possible that you didn't see as possible before. So a lot of our work as consultants around innovation is simply asking questions. I have entire workbooks, like 200 pages, just full of questions that we use to ask people to get them to think, hopefully differently, about their world, about their assumptions, about reality. Now, this has important consequences in organizations, because in some organizations, people who ask a lot of questions eventually become tedious, and we don't want to deal with them anymore because we have work to do. So occasionally you'll find a company, it's typically a for-profit, and there's somebody who's really good at asking questions, but people can't really work with this person. So they stick them in a department called Research and Development, and every once in a while they'll go and open the door, and the guy or the person will be there asking lots of questions, and they'll listen for a while until they can't stand it anymore, and then they shut the door again. Because it's really hard when you're in a production-oriented environment to deal with these sometimes philosophical questions, sometimes even practical. But finding a way to incorporate that way of being and working into your work teams can be really, really helpful. And you can obviously manage it pretty effectively by structuring your process and simply asking yourselves questions at the appropriate times. So speaking of process, innovation is interesting because you have to balance rigor and discipline with the intuitive and the open-ended. So finding the balance between those is really one of the challenges that we have. There's issues around timing, there's issues around what type of thinking. So we want to balance the intuitive nature of insight with the rigorous discipline process for achieving organizational results. Innovation also has a rhythm, and one of the characteristics of that rhythm is our